good. It's good.
Do you guys want to know what I think is completely amazing, what I'm just like totally in love with? It's Sweden. Come on, give it up for me, guys. Come on. Look. I want to thank you all so much. This is my third time on stage at From Business to Buttons. I want to thank the whole team at In Use for inviting me back. I want to thank you all. It is such a pleasure to be here. You want to know what else? Want to know another thing that I'm just in awe of? I just think it's so fantastic. It's print. Man, print is just this amazing technology. I mean, you put the words on the paper and they stay there. You don't have to worry about keeping it updated all the time. So, I mean, print, when you look back at the history of human communication, like the 500 years we have of the printing press and the thousands of years that we have of written communication, you realize just how much of human beings' ability to form relationships, to judge hierarchy, to understand priority, to draw meaning from written communications comes from the technologies that we have invented to put ink on paper. And then we had to go and invent the web, which I'm going to say, on balance, has been totally worth it. But man, is it a pain in the ass. So the web just turned, I don't know, 20, 25, opinions vary on how old the web is, but 20 to 25 years of, and when you look back at the very foundations of the web, hypertext markup language, HTML, the uniform resource locator, the URL, those technologies were created with the explicit intent that anyone, anywhere, could create a document that could be updated instantaneously and accessible globally. And I mean, when you just kind of take a step back from the day-to-day stuff that we do all day long and appreciate just how different that is in the history of human communication, I mean, just how unlike print the web is, it's like 20, 25 years isn't nearly enough time for human beings to have wrapped their heads around the ways that the web is different. And so as a result, we've spent the last couple of decades just sort of band-aiding ourselves along, imagining that a web page is, well, it's basically just a glorified print document. I mean, it's square, it's like a piece of paper, we can just treat it like that. And so now with the rise of mobile devices, we are forced to come to terms with the way that the web is different. And I want to be clear about something. The web has always been different. It's just that now we are forced to give up this shared hallucination that we have been operating under, that we have any control at all over the size of someone's screen, over the resolution of that device, over the network connection speed, over the input mechanism that they're using to interact. All of that is gone, and it is never coming back. And so when I talk about content strategy for mobile, I don't mean how do you get your stuff to work on a smartphone or on a tablet. What I mean is, how do human beings wrap their heads around this idea, this new framework, that we now have to separate what it is that we create from any one particular visual representation of that document? To me, that is the real transformation that we are working towards today. So, I want to be clear about something. I am not a futurist. I am not here today to predict for you what I think the next big thing is going to be. If I could do that, I would be doing that full time. But I will guarantee you one thing, and it's this. There will be a next big thing. And whatever that next big thing is, we're going to have to figure out how to get our stuff to work on it.
Just change this one.
Nope. So maybe the next big thing is going to be smart TV. There's a lot of people hypothesizing that the next great wave of innovation will be a fight for the living room. And I think the idea that we would have the web working on everything from the smallest smartphones all the way up through the largest TV screens really drives home the fallacy of making any assumptions at all about the size of the screen that someone has, or the input mechanism that they are using to interact, or even the context of their use. Rather, it drives home the necessity for us to think more flexibly and fluidly about what we produce. Or maybe the next big thing is in-car systems. So I live in Manhattan, I don't drive. The idea of somebody having a touchscreen on the dashboard of their car is genuinely terrifying to me. But I don't really think when you talk about in-car systems that the innovation is going to be having a touchscreen on your dashboard. Sure, there may be a screen, but there's also going to be a combination of hard-coded buttons and an audio interface, a speech-based interface. And I know right now today, it's really easy to mock the idea of audio interfaces, right? I mean, it's like you're talking to Siri and you're yelling at her and you start swearing because she never understands what you mean. You know what else didn't work for like 25 years? Touch screens. Touch screens were terrible. Do you remember you'd have to go to the ATM and try to angle your finger just right so you could get the button to push? For nearly 2 decades, touchscreens were seen as this also-ran technology that was never going to quite make the prime time. And then one day, touchscreens worked, and they worked perfectly. And it transformed our entire industry in the space of 5 years? So I don't know when audio interfaces will one day become a reality. If it's 5 years, 15 years, 50 years. But I do know that one day, the Star Trek computer will be real. And the last thing that I want when I go up and talk to the Star Trek computer is to have it start spitting back http://open bracket at me. Sometimes developers will say to me, Karen, why do we have to bother trying to parse out when we should mark something up as italics and when we should mark it up as emphasis, when every major browser since the dawn of time has rendered emphasis as italics? Not in an audio interface, they don't. See, one of those things conveys visual styling. The other conveys semantic meaning. In an audio interface, emphasis would be rendered by tone of voice. And so when you unpack that, when you get down to realizing that way down at the tiniest little one-character HTML tag, we are making assumptions about what somebody means by relying on visual styling cues that we have derived from print, you realize that if our content has any fighting chance of working across a variety of different platforms, we need new tools and new ways to render the meaning of what we want to say, separate from what it looks like on any one platform. If you're interested in this stuff at all, I would encourage you to check out what Google is doing with what they call their conversation group. So Google is a company that can make cars that drive themselves. And that's not even their core business. That's just some weird side project that somebody dreamed up. No, how human beings communicate with technology through language, that is squarely in Google's sweet spot. And they are investing really heavily in trying to figure out how to make audio interfaces a reality. So if that's the case, maybe the next big thing is going to be Google Glass. I don't really think Google Glass is going to be the next big thing. I think Google Glass is like the Segway of mobile. It's like a Segway, but for your face. But I do think this idea that wearable devices, heads-up displays, could be a real reality. I worked with a company this past year that provides industrial parts. So they sell washers and nuts and bolts and screws to companies in factory or industrial settings. And the way that they sell those products today is this giant 2-inch thick catalog where they have a picture and a description of every single part that they make. And I worked with them and I said, look, I'm not here to tell you when you're gonna stop printing this giant phone book, okay? If it's 5 years, 50 years from now, I'm not sure. But I think we all recognize that a day is going to come when the world no longer needs a 2-inch thick catalog of screws. So when that day comes, what happens if the most likely place that that organization wants to reach its customers is through wearable displays? These are people who are working in factory settings or in industrial settings. They may not ever walk into the back room and use a desktop computer, and on the factory floor, they may not even want to pull a phone out of their pocket. So if this is the reality, what does that company need to do starting right now, today, to update their content, change their workflow, change their editorial processes, change their culture, so that their focus isn't on how do they get the ink on paper, but rather how do they get their product catalog into a format that it can be read and navigated from a future display? Those are the types of challenges that we need to start solving right now, because the future's going to get here before we know it. But okay, Google Glass, not the next big thing. Obviously, the next big thing is watches, right? Right? Watches, come on, everybody's talking about watches. Apple Watch is going on sale on Friday. And when I talk about watches, I can just sense the fatigue that people have where they're just like, oh God, Karen, not another device, really? Can't we all just accept that nobody's ever gonna wanna read a document on their watch? That's dumb. That's what we used to say about phones, right? Who would ever read on their phone? But even if you don't believe that the watch is the primary consumption device for reading long documents, the watch could be a hub for a notification network for your smartphone, or the controller that allows you to interact with your smart TV, or a navigation function that lets you cycle through things you want to hear on your audio interface. And so the idea that even though you may not use a watch as a consumption device, content still needs to be rendered in a readable, navigable fashion on that device. But I get it, watches, so tiny, obviously not the next big thing. Surely the next big thing is going to be stadium scoreboards! Woo! Let's get our content where everybody can see it, guys. This is a joke. I put this in here as a joke because I thought it was funny, right? Because watches are so tiny, scoreboards are big. And then I turned around and I talked to a client who said the biggest problem they're trying to solve is digital signage. So it's a university client. And they just bought all these digital screens that they're going to put up all over campus. And they came to me and they said, Karen, we have a website, we have native apps, and now we have these new digital signs. And we want a way to manage and maintain our content in one place and have it automatically update to these 3 very different form factors. And I was like, hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you treat the digital signs as if they're just this completely separate silo with its own workflow and publishing process? And they were like, Karen, ain't nobody got time for that. No, the whole reason you're talking to you is that they want a way to take things like news for students or campus alerts or events listings and maintain one set of that content, but have it automatically update to these 3 wildly different form factors. This isn't some crazy futuristic dystopia that these people are living in. This is a real problem they're trying to solve right now, today. So if this is a problem for the enterprise, maybe you too will be faced with a similar problem at home with your internet refrigerator, right? Can't talk about the future without talking about the internet refrigerator. It's like I think the biggest problem facing our society today is that I can't check Twitter in the 30 seconds it takes me to get a Diet Coke. So the internet refrigerator is not going to be the next big thing. But the idea that there will be a network of screens and sensors in our homes is a reality. Maybe it's not a refrigerator. Maybe instead it's an internet-enabled glass cooktop where there's a touch screen and you can navigate through news stories or recipes or videos right there on your cooking surface. Or, and I do think this is the biggest problem facing our society today, what happens when toaster printers become a reality? Is your website ready to be burned onto delicious toast? These are the problems that we're here to solve together. So right now today, organizations are already wrestling with the challenge of how do they get their content to work on a variety of different platforms. They have a website, How do they deal with the mobile web? Should they create native apps? Do they have to create separate apps for tablets? How do they integrate that with their processes for publishing to blogs, or to social channels, or to email, or to their intranet? Heck, how do they integrate that with some of their processes for publishing to print? And tomorrow, it's going to be a veritable zombie apocalypse of new devices and platforms and screen sizes and resolutions and input mechanisms, and it's never going to stop. I don't care if you think any one of these new platforms is going to be the next big thing. You can come up to me after this talk and be like, Karen, watches, who cares? Smart TV, not a problem for me. Doesn't matter. See, the organizations that today embrace the challenge of figuring out how do they develop a truly device-agnostic publishing process? How do they embrace the flexible, fluid nature of the web? Those are the organizations that will survive the zombie apocalypse. And so when you talk about surviving the zombie apocalypse, it comes down to a question of how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect ourselves from this onslaught of new devices? And I think the answer to that drives a stake into the very heart of what makes the web the web. And it is this notion of having true separation of content from form. Think about this for a minute. Throughout all of human history, there has never been any real need to talk about this problem. If you went to this medieval monk laboriously hand-scribing documents and you asked him, let's have a conversation about how you would communicate the meaning and hierarchy and relationships and priority of this document, separate from the particular visual instance that you were creating at this moment in time, that conversation would not make any sense. Up until this point in human history, we've never had to solve this problem. And yet today on the web, it is one of the most vexing problems we have to work through. Sometimes I talk to people and I say, hey, what does true separation of content from form mean to you? And the developers in the audience are all like, ooh, I know this one, it's CSS. CSS is the answer. And that's part of it. But the truth is that it's tempting to reduce this issue of separating content from form to a problem with markup. Dan Jacobson, he's the API guy from Netflix, he's formerly from NPR. He says that the future of content management systems is in their ability to capture the content in a clean, presentation-independent way. And the problem with this is that this goes so much deeper than just the front-end code. It goes through the entire production process of how content creators think about what they're creating, and it goes even deeper into the very bowels of the content management system and the publishing systems. I tend to complain about the use of things like rich text editors on the web, these interfaces where we give content creators a what you see is what you get WYSIWYG toolbar, where we encourage them to imagine that publishing to the web is just like Microsoft Word. This one says, the Word-like interface makes content creation easy for business users who know nothing about HTML and want to keep it that way. And so we tell them, oh, here, no, you can just use this familiar toolbar. Look, it's just like Microsoft Word. You can drop in a table and add some custom bullets. You can take this box and float it to the right and make it purple. But the problem is that the styling tools that we are giving people are actually intended to create meaning. For that content creator, she didn't want a purple box floated to the right. What she wanted was to set that box off as a table of contents or a signposting feature. But instead, the only tools that we could give her were encoding what it actually looked like on the page. And so it'll look perfect in the one and only one platform that she was imagining it, which was the desktop web. And then when it comes time to take this material and take it to any other platform, all of that stuff has to be removed or stripped out. I have to confess something to you guys. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. I really enjoy coming out, having conversations with groups of people like you, but my graffiti crime spree is going exceptionally well. I really feel like I'm getting the message out to a much broader audience that we can no longer rely on WYSIWYG styling tools from the desktop publishing era in order to communicate to content creators what it means to publish to the web. Do you guys know where WYSIWYG came from? It came from Xerox. It came from Xerox PARC. because they invented the laser printer. Think about that for a minute. Up until this point, Xerox machines could only make a copy of a document that already existed. Xerox invented a way that you could print out whatever you wanted. But they needed a way for you to be able to actually create that document. And so Xerox invented the entire concept of what you see is what you get, the entire concept of desktop publishing, the entire concept of the graphical user interface, so that they could sell laser printers. I would argue that the laser printer is the most important component of the desktop publishing revolution. Demand for laser printers, demand for desktop publishing is what drove adoption of the personal computer. It directly drove adoption of the web. As people bought personal computers with graphical interfaces, they bought Apples, so that they could print out newsletters with too many fonts, and eventually that led to the web. I believe that all of us here have a job today, in some sense, because of the innovations pioneered as part of the desktop publishing revolution to create WYSIWYG interfaces. And so I feel like I can say with a great deal of respect for the mental models and the metaphors that have come before us, that the web is not a laser printer. There is nothing about the web that has anything in common with the laser printer next to your desk. The web is better than print. And yet we still today rely on antiquated mental models derived from a desktop publishing revolution 40 years ago to communicate to content creators what it means to publish to the web. If we are to survive the zombie apocalypse, we need new mental models. We need new ways of thinking about what we publish. We need to communicate to content creators that their jobs have to change in the same way that graphic designers' jobs and developers' jobs have changed. Ted Nelson says that imitating paper on a computer screen is like tearing the wings off a 747 and using it as a bus on the highway. The web can do more than print. And it is time for us to break away from our antiquated mental models. I describe this as a war, people. We are fighting a war between blobs and chunks. Blobs are these big, messy, formatting-dependent, everything in the kitchen sink, shove it all in a WordPress field, let's use a wiki to manage our website. Publishing processes that essentially rely on paper-based formatting and tools from the print era in order to publish to web pages. Chunks are flexible, presentation-independent, individualized bits of content that are created from the start with the intention that they can and will live on any platform. This is a war, people. We cannot let the blobs win. Let me leave you with this. I know it's been said before, but it bears repeating. The web's not print. The tools, the processes, the mental models, the styling mechanisms that we have created from hundreds of years of printing presses and thousands of years of ink on paper no longer serve their purpose when we are talking about a truly dynamic, truly instantaneous, truly global platform. For the last 25 years, we've been able to get away with pretending that the web was essentially just like print. But now with the rise of mobile devices, we are forced to come to terms with the fact that we can no longer make assumptions about the size of the screen or what somebody is using. We need new tools to adapt to this new way of working. The way that people create content will have to change. We can no longer rely on pretending that people have a Word document. Instead, we have to innovate new publishing processes, new content management systems in order to help content creators understand and get better at publishing to the web. We have to do this because the zombie apocalypse will not stop. Whatever new device, whatever new platform, whatever new screen size, whatever new resolution comes along, we want to give our websites, we want to give our content a fighting shot of being able to survive on those platforms. In order to do so, We have to break free of our container-dependent, print-dependent mindset and instead embrace a flexible, fluid new way of approaching what makes the web truly the web. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. You know why this message you have is so relevant for me? Because I've been a newspaperman for 25 years, and I left that business, and now you underline kind of 5 times that the web isn't print. That's the way we thought when we started in some 94 or something. Sure. to change the flow of news out on the internet. Do you honestly mean that the disease is still there? Or aren't we cured from that thinking, that to take print thinking and transfer it to the web?
Well, I think that I sometimes call it container-first thinking. So I do a lot of work with the publishing industry, and it's very common for, if you're a newspaper person, you write to fill the hole. You're told how many column inches you're going to get. Right. If you're a magazine producer, they often will design the layouts first and then tell somebody, okay, here's the space that you have to write. The idea that we embrace the notion of starting only with the container and then figuring out what we want to put into it, we sometimes, in some cases, we have to shift that paradigm and look toward creating content that is flexible for reuse so that it has a shot of working well in whatever container we want to put it into, because the number of containers and the types of containers we'll want to use varies so widely. So rather than having something that's attached to one layout or one form, we need to give it some flexibility so that it can possibly work in a variety of contexts.
Yeah. Annika, is there any Twitter flow yet?
I haven't seen a question yet, so please,
okay,
Twitter.
You're welcome if you like. Now, one more follow-up on that, what we discussed. You've been working with several publishing houses.
Yes.
Have you sort of encountered a big problem to get them to think in new ways?
That's my whole
you
job.
work for New York Times, for
Sure.
example?
Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
I sometimes describe my work over the last 10 years or so as dragging magazines kicking and screaming onto the internet. That, yes, that it is extremely challenging, I think, especially for traditional publishers, to move into a new way of thinking. That they, their business model was based on scarcity of the distribution network, based on having a strong editorial voice that came from them. And while I don't mean to say that that's no longer important, the prominence of that, the importance of that shifts when there is no longer scarcity in distribution, where there is room for so many more voices, and where the way that we value content has changed, for better or for worse. And I think many traditional publishers have just desperately clung to their old publishing processes. Like I have spoken for many years about the folly of tablet editions of magazines. Like, it was like they thought the world was just waiting for a form factor that would let them put a big piece of paper on it. And guess what? Turns out that's not what customers want. Readers were not clamoring for a 300 megabyte download that they could uncomfortably swipe through. People consume content in different ways, and they expect content to be presented in different ways, and it's hard for publishers to change.
Another thing.
Okay.
Can't you tell us a little what you're doing at the School of Visual Arts?
Yes, it's one of my favorite things that I do. So I teach the design management class in the Master of Fine Arts program in interaction design. And I will say, I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a master's degree from an engineering school, and somehow that has qualified me to teach the business class in a fine arts program. So the class that I teach is focused on giving students the ability to manage and run successful projects and teams and businesses. So basically it's a business 101 class where I talk about how businesses make money, or I guess the way I describe it is, how do organizations value design? How is design evaluated? How does money come into the equation when you're talking about the value of your work? And how do you think about the idea that you can do great work, or you should be aiming for doing great work, but that one component of that is that that work will be valued as highly as possible. And how do you make trade-offs between what you perceive as quality or what you perceive as like your vision and ensuring that projects are profitable and that everybody makes money? And I love teaching it. It's one of my favorite things that I do.
Okay, did you enjoy Karen's speech? Did you? Good.
Great, thank you.
Karen McGrane, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.